I'm popping in today with a quick tip that I find helps me stitch more quickly and easily, and also gives me neater stitches. Hi there stitchy friends, I'm Kat from Catkin and Lily, bringing you all the best tips, tricks and tutorials so you can get the most joy from your cross stitching. Now, I call this tip use the empty hole, and it's something you might actually already do without even realising it. So this tip basically centres around which holes you choose to bring your needle up, in or down in. So when I'm stitching, I find that if a hole is completely empty, it doesn't really matter whether I'm pushing my needle down from the front or bringing it up from the back, other than the obvious fact that if you're bringing the needle up from the back, then it's just a little bit more difficult because you can't see where you're putting it. But when you're going to put your needle through a hole like one of these that's already got thread in it, well, I find it much easier to be pushing my needle down from the front than trying to bring it up from the back in a hole like this that's already got threads. It's far easier when you're coming up from the back to accidentally split the threads that are in that hole, or just to cause them to separate slightly or lie slightly weirdly, so your stitching doesn't look quite as neat. So I like to try and stitch in such a way that I can always be coming up in an empty or more empty hole and pushing my needle down from the front in holes that have more threads in them. Hence, use the empty hole. This will of course be a lot easier to see in practice, so let me show you exactly what I mean. So let's say I'm going to stitch a small block of stitches. I've worked this row already, and I've worked it from left to right. So I worked a half row of stitches across and then finished the top arms going back the other way. So if I wanted to work the next row in the block was above this row here, well, it's going to be a little awkward to start with because actually this hole here, this is the one that my needle went down in, so I can't come up in that one, which is not how I would usually like to make my stitches. So I'll make the first stitch going what is the wrong way for me. And then normally I would make my stitch coming up in the bottom left-hand corner and going down in the top right-hand corner. So I'm having to bring my needle up in this hole here that's already got threads in it. And then I'm going down in the empty hole. So this is the opposite of what I would generally try and do, because I feel like that's going to be more prone to splitting the threads that are in the hole. And the same when I come back across, again, I'm coming up in this hole here. This has already got 3 threads in it. And this one's only got 1 thread in it. So let's finish that row off, and then I'll show you what I would prefer to do to use the empty hole. Okay, so if instead of going to the row above, I actually go to the row below, now I'm coming up in an empty hole. And I'm going to go down in a hole that's got threads in it. So this is how I would prefer to stitch. So when I'm working from left to right, I'll always try and work down in the block, because that way I'm always using the empty hole. When I say using the empty hole to come up from the back. And the same as I work my way back across, I'm using the empty hole as I go back across. And I say empty because this one, this is now, obviously this is not empty, but it's only got 1 thread in it, as opposed to this one here, I'm going down in this one where there's 3 threads. So to use the empty hole, or as close to empty as you can get. And that's how I would continue working. So to flip this round, if I were working my rows instead from right to left, then to use the empty hole, I would then want to work in an upwards direction rather than downwards. Now, one other benefit to using the empty hole is that I find it helps me to stitch quicker, because I'm spending less time trying to get my needle in exactly the right place or avoid splitting any threads or making them go all wonky when I'm bringing my needle up from the back. Of course, it isn't always possible to use this method all the time, because it just depends on the pattern. But I definitely keep it in mind when I'm deciding which section of a pattern I want to stitch next and which direction I'm going to stitch it in. Now, I will also say that you might make your stitches in a slightly different way to me. So you might find that you need to be doing something slightly different to be using the empty hole. So just have a play around and see what works for you. I'm curious to know if anyone else does this, and if so, did someone suggest it to you, or did you just discover it by accident? But if this is new to you, then do give it a go and let me know if it's helpful. If you enjoyed this quick tip video, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so that you can stay in the loop for more stitchy tips and tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and happy stitching!